Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and I am so excited to bring you today's bonus episode, Alan and Kitces Unhinged. So we do these once a month. They are basically just mailbag episodes where we just want to answer listener questions. We want to hear from you on, what are you dealing with? What questions do you have, especially after you listen to an episode? If there's some things that you want to hear Michael and I discuss, you are more than welcome to shoot us an email at radio@xyplanningnetwork.com, or you can join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP in order to get your question answered. And sometimes we'll choose to do an entire show about it. Sometimes we will just answer the question on these episodes. So today, Michael and I get to 5 different questions, starting with a question around niche marketing to a psychographic instead of a demographic, focus. We also talk about putting your blog on your website, or should the blog be standalone? A little bit of a discussion around marriage and spouses, partners, significant others in the process of launching a firm, and just some things to be aware of, especially for those that are looking to get married and have kind of aspirations to launch their own firm. We also talked about naming your firm. So should you have your last name in it or your first name in the name of your firm, or should it just be, a little more generic or something a little more creative? And then we wrap up with a discussion around fees and how to calculate fees and complexities. So this is an awesome episode of a lot of really great content. So hope you enjoy. This month's shows are brought to you by BettermentInstitutional.com, the advisor-branded digital platform that automates the operational side of your business and lets you do what you do best, advise clients. Schedule a demo at www.bettermentinstitutional.com, and you can also listen to our interview with Steve Lokshin, the co-founder of Betterment Institutional and the platform's first advisor client, at www.xyplanningnetwork.com/16. All right, without further ado, here is Michael and I with Alan and Kitces Unhinged. Hey, Michael, welcome back to this bonus episode of Alan and Kitces Unhinged.
Unhinged. I thought you were going to say unplugged, but I'm like, no, we are plugged into something. So
we are plugged in.
We are plugged in, but we are unhinged. We are talking all things financial planning this morning. This early morning. It's early for you there, right?
It is very early. It is before 8 a.m. And for anybody that knows me, I do not normally get up before 8 a.m., but Michael and I have had a just insane travel schedule this month. And so getting the two of us together for an hour via video when he is not sitting in an airport, it was pretty much impossible. So we are early morning it.
Unless we can take reader feedback. If in the future you would like to listen to this podcast while hearing airport announcements of flight boarding, I could record one in an airport if you want. I am the road warrior these days. I'm actually in the middle of this crazy stint of 9 conferences in 11 days right now. So I realized yesterday I actually seriously had a moment where I figured out what day of the week it is by what city I was in. It was like, oh, I'm at the BAM event. Okay, then it's Saturday. Oh, man.
We're working with Michael to slow down his travel schedule just a smidge, but this is conference season, so I totally understand. I'm on the road most of October and November as well. So today,
I love being out, just hearing what we're talking about, what's on everybody's minds, advisors. Obviously, that's kind of subject for today's podcast mailbag episode as well. But I'm always fascinated to hear, what are we working on? What are we struggling with? Where are the challenges? Where are the opportunities?
Yeah, these are actually my favorite episodes just because we are taking listener questions. And if you have questions, please send them to us at radio@xyplanningnetwork.com, or you can join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. And you'll get access to our private Facebook group, and you can ask us questions there as well. We put a call out every few weeks to get these questions. So these are all coming from our community and from emails that are coming in. So if you hear something you're confused by or just something you want to hear us talk more about, we'll either do a full episode on it, which we have done in the past, or we will throw it in here. So to kick this thing off, these are going to be pretty varied. We're just going to kind of answer the questions as they come in and see how far we get. So the first question, my niche is based on psychographics rather than demographics. This makes describing my niche pretty wordy, which isn't helpful or for clear and concise copy on my website. Any resources that you recommend to help me or others who have this type of niche?
All right, so a few things come to mind here. And for those of you who are wondering, like, this is part of the game that Alan likes to play. He doesn't tell me anything about the questions in advance.
Michael has never seen these questions.
I have no idea, like, what's coming. So, like, yeah, let's drop a psychographics bomb at first thing in the morning here.
To be fair, I saw these 5 minutes ago, so it's not like I rehearsed my answers.
Okay, fantastic. We're just totally conveying how much preparation has gone into today's mailbag episode here. So, all right, so I feel like we got to define this first. So for those of you who aren't familiar, so we talk about niches. We're going to have a place to focus. We're going to have a group to focus on. So there's different ways that you can focus on niches. There's kind of the classic demographics. I focus on young people. I focus on old people. I focus on people that, fit some particular demographically driven profile. Now, the alternative way that some people frame niches and some folks out there advocate niches, I'm kind of neutral on this about whether it's better or worse or just different, is to define them on psychographics. So it's things like I typically work with people who like to delegate authority and are very happy-go-lucky because, those are just kind of people I like to be around. So that's who I work with as a niche. And you can define by sort of different types of personality profiles and other forms of psychographics as a way to sort of define this target clientele that you're trying to work with. So like I know someone actually who kind of does a sort of demographics/psychographics intersection. Basically, they love working with baby boomers who've just retired and want to be globetrotters. So kind of this like freewheeling travel-go-lucky sort of thing for people who've just retired and now like want to start doing that and living that lifestyle. And he works with them a little to do that transition. So the challenge around psychographics, at least demographics are relatively straightforward when you're trying to frame a niche. Like Sophia Bear on our network, her niche is demographics. It's Generation Y. She does financial planning for the remarkably handy firm name Gen Y Planning. You can kind of just put it right there. When you get into psychographics, a little harder, like, oh yeah, just go to happygoluckyglobetrotters.com. Starts getting a little wordy and awkward. I don't think this has to be a deal killer, though. And the key distinction that I'd make here is what you put on your website, what you communicate out to people. You don't have to write every keyword of your niche in the description of your business, your services, who you work with on your site, particularly not as like a large flashing banner. Like if you're not a globe-trotting world traveler between the age of 58 and 68, I don't want to work with you. Like you don't quite have to be that blatant about it. If I'm someone that works, if my niche is baby boomer globetrotters, like when you come to my website, frankly, I'm probably just gonna have a bunch of pictures of people who happen to be around their early 60s, traveling to all sorts of exotic places, looking really happy and talking about how free they feel. Because that's the mental state I'm trying to connect with. And the reality, if I get a 45-year-old engineer who somehow shows up on my site and sees a bunch of pictures of 62-year-old globetrotters, it's going to be really apparent that this is probably not the best fit for me. And I don't need to say, you're young and not a globetrotter, go away. I can just, the imagery, the pictures, even the relatively short words that I use to start describing my services and connect with my prospective clients is still enough. And like, even those of you who've been to my site can see this. I have a bit of a psychographic profile of who I work with when I write for Kitces.com. So if you go to like the homepage of Kitces.com, you get this message that says, finally, continuing education that actually teaches you something. Because I'm trying to reach a certain psychographic profile of people who are serious about their financial planning craft and are very frustrated about the low quality education out there and want a resource that actually gives them useful information that they can trust. So I don't have to write up there like a long list of psychographic keywords I've kind of defined of who these people are. I just need to write a statement, a sentence, a comment, a something that can connect with the people who have that mental profile.
Yeah, I think you make a couple good points. One is that even though we may talk about demographics, like I work with entrepreneurs, the truth is we all have a demographic and psychographic kind of pieces inside of this niche market that we're serving, because ultimately we work better with certain personalities and not necessarily just their demographics. Yep. And so I guess both of these pieces are always going to be a component. But I think you make a really good point also that we need to speak to our client, not necessarily describe our client to them. So it's okay to use imagery, quotes, words, things that connect with them, that let them know that you know their world, you know the type of advisor that they're looking for, and that you're that advisor, not necessarily this is who I work with, bam, 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 bam. So so if you do have that psychographic profile, just think through, how am I going to speak to my client? How am I going to speak to that perfect prospective client that comes to my website, and talk to them, don't talk about them, I think is what we're both trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Like, you should know what that profile is, what that demographic and psychographic profile is, so that you can come up with the words, the imagery, the concepts, the statements that will connect with them. But ultimately, it's about the words, images, comments, statements that will connect with them. It's not just about writing like, hey, are you a globe-trotting baby boomer? Well, we're the site for you. Like, that's, I suppose for some niches that sort of works, but I think that's actually a rather crude way of going about it, and one that's not always going to connect with people, because frankly, there are aspects of how we can sort of define ourselves psychographically that we don't always necessarily use to describe ourselves. Like, if you ask most baby boomers to describe themselves, the first word they don't actually use is, I'm a baby boomer. Right? There are some commonalities to our generations, but we usually don't define ourselves by our generations, except maybe me, because I'm a damn proud Gen Xer, and I'll say I'm a Gen Xer. But most of us don't define ourselves by a lot of those psychographic profiles. Like, I know a guy who's a former engineer turned financial planner. He basically works with other engineers, but he doesn't write on his website like, I work with meticulous pain in the ass engineers that no one else wants to work with, because I'll do the details that no one else wants to do, because that would be kind of an obnoxious thing to say. But that's basically his niche. Like, he actually gets referral. Like, if you get a client that you can't deal with because they're just too meticulously detailed, want to analyze and deconstruct everything, you send them to this guy, and that's who he works with. So you don't always have to use those words to describe who you're trying to work with. You should use words that will connect with those people, because you know what connects with them, hopefully, because you've so thoroughly defined their psychographic profile.
Totally agree. All right. So moving on to question number 2. We actually had Jeff Rose speak at the advisor track at FinCon. And so this question comes out of his session, who asked, Jeff Rose recommended that our blog be separate from our planning site, on a completely different domain, URL, different name, different brand. Because the blog is the main way that I write content for our niche, is that something you agree with? So do you agree that the blog and website should be on different domains, or they should be on the same domain?
So this is a really good question, and I have to admit I am somewhat torn about it, because I really to me this is actually a very, very high level strategy decision for you and your business, and where those various things fit together. So if you are a sole proprietor, your business is you are your business, your sole focus is, I'm just trying to build this advisory firm and do this advisory firm thing, I think I would absolutely make the website and the blog all in one. The blog is you, the business is you, you are you. This transcends throughout, and I think it needs to be all you. If you're a larger business, if you're a larger advisory firm, but you're really trying to do blogging as a strategy to build your business, again, I think the blog needs to be on the business website. You're trying to get your business website to rank higher on Google. Why would you not take all the blog content to get all the SEO juice you can to drive everything about your site higher up on the rankings? It's frankly good both for your blog traffic and just for the website traffic. Now, when people search for your firm, you actually come up first because you're a advisory firm that has a high-ranking blog on it if you've done a good job building the blog. The place where I start looking at something separate, where I separate these out, and I say this as a person who has my own blog separate from our advisory firm site. So we have Pinnacle Advisory Group, we have an XYPN Network blog, New Plan Recruiting has a blog, and then I've got Kitces.com, I've got my own. And the reason ultimately that I have my own, like I'll kind of confess it in a way that's not meant to sound totally greedy, but like my blog was ultimately about building my personal platform, my personal brand platform, which is separate from
the firm.
Separate from the firm in the first place. Like, I hope it brings in some clients that I can bring to the firm. It does bring in some clients that I can bring to the firm, but the scope of my blog and ultimately the scope of me is broader than that. And I think you see the same thing reflected in folks like Jeff Rose. So, you know, if you've never read through some of the background, Jeff occasionally does these income statements where he talks about, you know, where he makes his money and how he makes his money. And he actually makes his money in ways that are much broader than just the advisory firm. He does, you know, everything from some affiliate offers in the blogging world to some advertising in the blogging world. He's got actually some separate businesses that drive insurance activity. So because he's got like multiple different businesses that all intersect that are beyond just his advisory firm, which I believe is called Alliance Wealth Management, he's got the Jeff Rose site for the stuff that Jeff Rose does, and then he's got the Alliance site for the stuff that he does on the Alliance side. So like that's the driver. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I feel like this is making us sound really narcissistic, but like, is the blog about the advisory firm, or is the blog about you and the things that you want to build? And if they're one and the same, then the blog should be one and the same. And if you're really trying to build on two channels, you're probably going to want them on two channels.
Yeah, we had Jeff Rose on back in episode 4, XYPlanningnetwork.com/4. And he actually said, I believe in the episode, or maybe he told me right beforehand, about half of his income comes from the RA, half comes from everything else. And like you said, that's reflected in his income statements. But yeah, I think it ultimately comes back to your goals. You know, what are you trying to build? If the sole purpose of the blog is to build your advisory practice and it is to drive, you know, clients to your advisory practice, I can't imagine a reason to split it off. The only other thing I could think of is if you are trying, and we see this a lot, if you have kind of an established brand that's been around for 20 or 30 years, you know, an established firm, and you're the young planner that's trying to start, you know, catering towards millennials, catering towards younger clients, the thought of blogging on the existing website may not make sense. The website may not have the ability to add a blog all that easily, or it's just not all that functionally, there. It's just not easy to use. Spinning off a separate brand, you know, a separate, you know, domain, separate voice really in terms of the marketing and the blogging and all of that to speak towards your ideal client. I could absolutely see that. And in many ways, that's because your firm has now two niche markets. It has whatever the market was that you were trying to serve with the existing firm, and now it has this new focus. I could definitely see splitting a blog off. And keep in mind, you know, your blog can be your website for your advisory firm. So
absolutely. I think, frankly, for most people, I hate to overgeneralize. I think for most people, it probably will be. Like, the idea of what folks like, what I did, what Jeff did, like building this entire, you know, blog platform, businesses around the blog kind of thing. Like, it's sort of an entrepreneurial blogging endeavor unto itself that just, I mean, if you want to do that and go make a separate blog to do that. But I think that's actually probably not most folks that we're talking to and listening to right now. I think for most, you're probably really on the other end. Like, if you're trying to build an advisory firm and you want to do it with blogging, put your blog on your advisory firm website, speak to your target clientele, have them type things into Google and find your blog, and realize it's part of an advisory firm that solves problems for people like them. And that's how you start getting business.
Yeah, and you just have to think through your goals. What are you trying to build? You know, if you're trying to build a speaking platform and consulting gigs, as well as your advisory business and some other businesses that you're going to be starting, spin it off. If it's to drive clients to the firm, put it on the advisory website. But the blog doesn't have to be a separate tab over on the far right-hand corner that's hidden away from everything. It can be your homepage. I mean, you can believe, you mentioned Sophia Barrow with Gen Y Planning. I believe hers is set up that way at GenYPlanning.com, where the homepage is the blog, and then it funnels people into the actual advisory pages or advisory services pages of the website. So that's certainly an option.
Yeah, I believe she has, or at least she did have, like the top of her website, when you go there, is just kind of a little banner of like who she does and what she talks to, and even on that homepage, I know like she talks to her target clientele. So, you know, it's like Gen Y Planning, financial planning for my generation. So, right, so she's connecting with fellow millennials right out of the gate. Money doesn't have to be scary or serious all the time. Money can be about joy, security, and confidence. Like, this is what she says on her website. I think actually, for those of you who haven't seen it, go check out GenYPlying.com, because it's an interesting example of Sophia speaking to both a demographic and psychographic profile, getting back to the first question, without necessarily saying, like, if you're a Gen Y person who's scared about money, welcome. Like, she doesn't use it in those terms, but a Gen Y person who's scary or freaked out about their money some of the time is going to resonate with the messaging that you see on her site. And then as soon as you scroll down a little bit more on her site, boom, up comes a whole bunch of blog posts, because it's right there on the homepage of her site.
Yeah, and that website just goes to show why you should work with a website designer that is excellent at branding and building great sites, not necessarily one that just focuses on building financial planning sites. But that is a conversation for another day. Yeah. Okay, so this is more of a comment that kind of led to an interesting email exchange in regards to some of our early episodes. I believe this actually came off our first episode with you, Michael, around what it took to start
what
a
firm.
What
did I do now?
Nothing bad. So if you go back to episode 1, that was our first episode. We had Kitces on, telling your story, essentially. And one of the things you talked about was having built up a war chest to launch your own firm and be able to save money, be able to get your personal expenses under control. And so
I don't know that I had a war chest, but I had a little savings.
It felt like a war chest at the time.
It did. I lived very modestly. It felt like a war chest at the time.
And so this comment came in and said, Michael and Alan, I think you did a great job pointing out the need to live reasonably and build up a war chest before you start your own practice. But there's another unspoken point that I think it's important to make. It's hard to think of a delicate way of saying it, but one needs to be very thoughtful in considering getting married at this point in your career as well as who they marry. I know several employee planners who are essentially trapped in their jobs because their spouse did not have the risk tolerance and confidence in the long-term outcome and is not on board with them dropping their salary. I think this is a really good point, and this is something I personally went through. Fortunately, my spouse at the time was very supportive of going solo, but part of that was because I had moved her across the country a couple of times, and then in my last job got fired after 6 months, and she was prepared, hoping that I wouldn't move her again. So I probably just browbeat her into. So
you beat her down mentally to the point where you going out on your own to start a business from scratch was actually a more stable path than where you currently were.
That's exactly right. Truth be told, I think we both experienced me getting fired in the same way, which was that it was kind of a shock to the norm and this belief that jobs are safe. I had always viewed starting a firm as very risky and having a job was very safe. And then I realized in the moment that I was fired, in a single moment, a person that I didn't even really like all that much took 100% of my salary from me. Whereas if a client fires me, I lose 5% of my salary. I lose 1%, depending, whatever that base of revenue is. Maybe you lose half of your income, but you don't lose all of it. And so I think in many ways we kind of got pushed into that position. But this is a really good point because I see this a lot as well. If you go to financial planning conferences, and I think back at XYPN Network where we have a ton of young advisors, Next Gen Gathering, a huge percentage of young planners are married. I would be interested to know if the statistics say that financial planners tend to get married younger because we're planners or whatever. We can make something up there, but and yet. If you're planning to start,
you just made that up. But.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm just speaking purely anecdotally.
But yeah, I hear you.
In terms of it just seems like out of my personal group of friends, a much lower percentage are married at this age than many advisors get married. I do wonder if we're taking into account the fact that if our ultimate goal is to start a firm, is our spouse going to be on board for that? Because if they're not, you will not be successful. If your spouse, partner, significant other is anti you starting a firm, I truly believe you will not be able to make it because you have to have someone to come home
to support you.
To support. Yep. Because the financial support's great, but it's more about the emotional support because there are a lot of highs and a lot of lows in entrepreneurship and many times all on the same day. I'll never forget the day I woke up and realized I didn't know how I was going to pay rent because the money wasn't there. The money just wasn't in the bank. And if, if my significant other had been not supportive of it, I would have been getting a job later that day somewhere. So it's something that I doubt very many people think about because, love is blind and we just kind of rush into things. But it is an important consideration.
Well, and frankly, it reminds me of some of the same conversations that we have with our clients, right? Like, how many of you out there, raise your collective hands, keep one wheel on the steering wheel, please, if you're driving. But how many of you raise your hands have ever sat across from a client couple where you start asking them questions about their hopes, dreams, goals, and wishes, what they want to do in retirement and such, and they have completely different answers, right? Like, where would you like to live when you retire? Here, anywhere but here. When would you like to retire? 62, 68. What do you want to do in retirement? Oh, well, we really like staying home. No, we should start traveling now. Like, people have differences, including sometimes you and your spouse. And I mean, having even worked with like client couples who are retiring who've been together for 30 years and still discover for the first time they have some different views about some of these things. So I think both there's a reality that absolutely sometimes spouses have different views around things like the risk of starting a business and entrepreneurialism. And that, like if you haven't had that conversation with your spouse, have that conversation with your spouse because it may be a new thing you didn't entirely know about them, about how they feel about it, right? And I'm gonna pull on Alan strings here. Like, you're going to get into money scripts that they've got about what money, earnings, job stability were like when they were young. Like, we form a lot of strong views around this. My wife had some tough experiences with a family financial situation at one point growing up. And so it's given her some very strong views around like whether we keep a mortgage or pay down a mortgage. And it's driven entirely by some experiences she had while we're young. My family, I grew up in a family where everybody always worked in normal, stable jobs. And so I was this like alien creature when I was going out to launch a business and to do something else. It's like, well, it's so like horrifically risky. How can you not have like a stable job environment? But, unwittingly, like, I think I had fallen into a very similar mental attitude to what Alan was talking about. I hadn't been fired out from one of my jobs. Like, I had the same kind of fear of like, I actually feel more stable when my income comes from me and not when I'm completely reliant on an employer deigning to still give me a job, even though I'd like to think I managed to do a decent enough job to stick around.
I did not. At some point,
as I frequently point out, you are thoroughly unemployable, particularly now that you've had like a taste of entrepreneurialism and businesses going so well with XYPN Network. So you, Alan, will never work for the man again, ever.
But it is this is kind of one of those things that I think, now my ex-spouse, but my spouse at the time knew that I had this kind of entrepreneurial streak. I do think that a lot of folks, and financial planning is an interesting business because of this, that I think a lot of people start firms that aren't true entrepreneur mindset folks. Like, they're not necessarily just hungry to start businesses. They just really kind of want to do their own thing. They kind of want control over their salary, their time. They want to work with clients they want to work with and just can't find the right opportunity. And so your partner may not have signed up for you to start a business, because that's just not your personality. So, to this listener's comment, I do think that you need to have some discussions, whether it's with an existing partner or folks that have potential to become long-term partners, that they understand what your goals are, and that, launching a business and being very lean for a couple of years in terms of income may just be the reality. And if you're a serial entrepreneur, then best of luck. Probably couples therapy would probably be the way to go. And I can attest to that.
Yeah. So I want to turn this around for a moment and talk about the good side of this as well. When you're going out and launching an advisory firm from scratch, a supportive spouse is really, really awesome.
Yes, it is.
Because as Talon talked about, like, yeah, it's going to be a bit of an emotional roller coaster. There's some highs and lows. And frankly, like, just from the purely financial end, you know what? If you can live reasonably and frugally and you can do the, two people, one spouse's income, if you can support the family on one spouse's income, that means when you go out and launch your advisory firm, if it takes you a couple of years to really get income going, that's okay, because you've managed the family expenses and you have two people to do the household income, which means if your business isn't producing any dollars coming in for a while, that's okay. And frankly, I know a lot of advisors that got their firms launched and successful because the only way they could do it is that they frankly had a spouse in a higher earning stable job who paid the bills and got stuff done until they could do the building process. And I know one advisor who like basically did like a 5-year plan trade-off with a spouse. So he worked in the stable job until his spouse went all the way through graduate school. And then when she finished graduate school, she got a nice stable job. They went from living entirely on his income to living entirely on her income. And then he broke out and went and started his own firm from scratch. And it took him a couple of years before the money started getting going. So like there are even those sorts of couples dynamics like, hey, honey, I'll support you in your endeavor. And then we'll flip it around and you can support me in mine. And that's one of the powerful things that makes it work. Like this even reminds me going back to the, as many of you know, like I started in the life insurance world, good old life insurance sales and an insurance agency. And frankly, one of the things that like one of the commonly recommended tactics for sales managers back then, the guys who hired the agents to come in, was you were actually supposed to interview the potential agent and their spouse because you wanted to know if the spouse was on board, because if the spouse wasn't on board, you took what already was a very low success rate and basically made it a guaranteed zero. Like if the spouse wasn't on board with this endeavor, this person was going to be gone in 3 months. They were going to go out there, they were going to try to sell some stuff, they were going to get beaten down because selling is hard, and a non-supportive spouse was just going to rip them right back out there, and it wasn't even worth taking the time and effort to hire that person and put them through a training class for a couple of weeks. So I think we've always kind of recognized in this industry in the various channels that spousal support matters. It does matter. And so, yeah, if you married someone, if you got an entrepreneurial itch and you married someone that doesn't support entrepreneurialism, at best, this is going to be a challenge for you. And, at worst, like recognize that, yeah, like you might really have to save up in the stable job you don't necessarily like for a while and build a giant war chest so you can go to your spouse and say, honey, we've saved up 2 years of family, like my emergency cash reserves, we have 2 years, we have 3 years so that I can go out there and do this for a while and all the bills are paid and everything's fine and everything will be stable. And we've got this really long runway to get things going. Now are you ready to support me and like do whatever your spouse needs to feel comfortable in this situation as best you can.
Totally agree. And this is an area where I actually am I was joking earlier, I'm a huge proponent of couples therapy. So if, therapy is not just for when things are broken. Therapy in many ways is just about helping you communicate some of these values. They basically do for communication in couples what we do for couples in financial planning. So, if you need a facilitator to help have that conversation, go for it.
Yep.
So switching gears a little bit, this is a really interesting question. I'll be interested to get your take on this. Regarding the launch of a new business, should firms come up with a trendy new business name or just go with last name, financial planning, etc.? So should we name it, more financial planning, more financial consulting, or should we go with something? And I guess there's an in-between. I went with Serenity Financial Consulting, mainly because Serenity Financial Planning was taken by a firm in London, I believe, over in the UK. So it would have been Serenity Financial Planning. It's almost in between. I would, is it all trendy? Is it trendy plus financial consulting, financial planning, wealth management, whatever? Or is it just last name financial planning?
Oh, man, I got like in a giant Twitter debate war about this a couple of weeks ago. I wonder if this is even where that question comes from. Someone that watched the Twitter stream and wanted further commentary on this. All right, so my answer in the long run is that in the long run it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. In the long run, what matters about building a business is whether you can ultimately institutionalize the brand of the business beyond just you as the founder and the owner. So, it's an interesting thing when you actually go out there and look how many businesses in a wide range of industries are still actually ultimately named after founders, creators, owners. Like Toyota Cars was actually Mr. Toyota. Merrill Lynch was Mr. Merrill, Mr. Lynch, and Mr. Fenner, Mr. Pierce, because originally it was all four of them. Arthur Anderson, these were actual people, Tommy Hilfiger, Ralph Lauren, like lots of different businesses and industries actually out there create businesses around individual names, individual people. Charles Schwab was after Charles Schwab. So like, I don't think there's any long-term impediment to naming your business after you and having it grow and become a brand and something that extends beyond just you as the founder. If you're ready and willing to make the mental effort and the business effort and just the years of strategy and building that it takes in order to do that. Now, I think there is a tendency out there that, first of all, a lot of people don't actually want to do that. They don't want to build this giant brand thing beyond themselves. They're not interested. They don't care. They just don't want to go down that road and all the stuff that you have to do to build a business that way. They'd rather just keep the business sort of centered around themselves and having an advisor, founder-centric business, which frankly is what most advisory firms are. Now, if you're advisor, founder-centric, you tend to name the business around you because it's built around you. And I think a lot of advisors that have a deliberate intent to make the business broader than themselves tend to not put their name in it from the start because they're trying to make it not about themselves. And that's sort of one of the ways that they put the stake in the ground to say it's not about themselves is, I'm not going to call it More Financial Planning. I'm going to call it Serenity Financial Consulting. But honestly, in the long run, like if your goal is to build a business and a brand that extends beyond you, eventually it's really about the brand and what the brand evokes. And you can build that brand with any words written on the page, whether it's Serenity Financial Planning or More Consulting, right? Like Schwab, the company name is Schwab, means something that's way more than, oh, this is awesome. If I go to Schwab, I personally get to work with Chuck and he'll manage my money. Like, it hasn't worked that way in like 25 years, but it's still got his name on the door.
Excellent. We finally have something we can argue about because I am
Awesome.
Probably on the exact opposite of where you're at with this. So I think you're using great examples of how companies have branded away from it being about the founder and branded into their brand meaning something. But those are major companies that have been around a really long time and have probably spent millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars on those branding efforts to make Charles Schwab mean something other than Mr. Schwab. If you are starting a firm today, I would argue that, and I actually went through this with my first boss, Rick Kaler out in Rapid City, South Dakota. His firm name is Kaler Financial Group, and it has been for 30 years. And we had this discussion where we said, like, should we rebrand? Because he was growing, he wanted to start bringing on junior partners, and he didn't want it to be just about Rick. And ultimately the only reason that he expressed to me that he did not make the switch was because the Kaler name in Rapid City was actually extremely well known, not only because of Rick, but also his family had a massive real estate business and property management business. So there were like 3 or 4 major businesses in a town of 100,000 people that it was Kaler Property Management, Kaler Realtor. And so everyone knew the Kaler name, whether they knew what the Kaler Financial Group did or not. People came in because they thought we sold real estate all the time. But ultimately, the Kaler name... So
you're saying they had a brand that surpassed the name of the founder.
Exactly. They did, but it took them 30 plus years to build. So I would say if you're starting a firm today, using your name is missing out on a marketing opportunity because it becomes about you instead of about your client. So I look at people like Matt Becker with Mom and Dad Money. If he had named it Becker Financial Planning, people go, okay, it's another financial planning firm. Let's go find out what Mr. Becker does. Well, instead, it's Mom and Dad Money, and people can think like, we're mom and dad. Maybe this is for us. I think there's an opportunity there to really brand yourself and to market and to leverage that, especially as a smaller firm, whether you plan to build an enterprise or you plan to keep it small or whatnot. And I just look at so many of the firms that are successful these days that are growing, and many of them don't name it after the founder. And I do want, or they rebrand away from the name of the founder. And I wonder, this may be correlation or it may be causation, but I do wonder if there is this kind of mental hurdle, like you mentioned, that, when you go to work for a firm that has the name of the founder on it, if you're like, okay, this is their firm, but it's said if it's more of a generic name that doesn't have the name of the founder in it, that it becomes more about the firm instead of the lead advisor.
See, and again, I think it's a correlation, not causation there. I mean, we say like, well, I don't want to buy into the firm because it's got the founder's name on the door. I'm going to virtually guarantee you, anybody who ever says that, it's not actually because the founder's name is on the door. It's because when you live in the firm day to day, it's built around the founder. It's a founder-centric culture. The firm operates and does what it does, focused entirely around the founder. Now, that's a valid reason to be concerned about buying into a business because it's a genuinely founder-centric business, but it's still not actually about the name on the door. And I know plenty of founder-centric businesses that don't have the founder's name on the door, but I wouldn't touch that business either because it's going to die as soon as the founder goes away because the business is entirely wrapped around the founder. So I think focusing on the name is a complete mirage. It completely loses the focus of what actually matters. What matters is the kind of firm you're trying to build, the kind of culture you're trying to institutionalize, what you're trying to build around. That either is focused around a founder and themselves, or is focused around a mission, a group they want to serve, a thing they want to accomplish, where the name actually takes on a meaning that goes beyond that. And, Schwab spent a lot of money over 30 years doing it, but it started with a dude who hired another person, who hired another person. And it's not like Chuck spent the first 28 years building a firm that was still exclusively about him and everybody else was just a random underling. And then the 29th year, he's like, I think I'm going to spend $10 million on branding and move it away from me. That's not the dynamic. The company grew past him by year 3 or something. I mean, Schwab had explosive growth right from their launch. So it was about something that was beyond Chuck within just a couple of years of when the business got going. And then it continued to grow from there. And eventually the name just evoked an image and a brand and a concept. And it wasn't about, nobody for 25 years has had an expectation that if you go into Charles Schwab, you are actually going to work with Charles Schwab.
Is Mr. Schwab still alive? I don't even know. Is Chuck still around?
Yes, he is. Yes, Chuck is still around.
We went through this. We went through this when we were naming the XY Planning Network. We could have named it the Allen and Kitces Network. We may have actually gotten some additional press early on because it would have had your name plastered all over it. And in fact, we did have one article written about it that called it the Allen and Michael Kitces Network.
Because we hadn't actually press released what the name was going to be. We just said we were working on something.
Yeah, so and it just kind of made some stuff up, which was great. We can tell that story one day.
Yeah,
but we wanted, our desire initially when we launched the business was we wanted it to be about something other than us. We didn't want this to be about Alan and Michael know all and we're going to teach you our ways. We don't know the one way to do this. We wanted to build a community of advisors that could teach each other. And so I do wonder if we had named it the Alan Moore Michael Kitces Network, if it would have become about us and if the culture and when we hired team members.
I think we would have had to be a lot more careful not to make it about us. And it's all right. I'll take a little bit of the other side of this argument as well. I've been kind of making the case that it's totally fine to name the firm after you. And you look at, so I'm a dude that's created a bunch of businesses now. So I've got a business that's built around me. It's Kitces.com. I've got other business I'm involved with, Pinnacle Advisory Group, XY Planning Network, New Planner Recruiting, Financial Advisor Bean Counters. So so truly, I think you can build both ways. I literally have built both ways. I've gone both paths. I will admit there's something in the day one launch phase where it is just a little bit easier when you actually name the freaking business for what you do. We have an advisory firm called New Planner Recruiting. How much time do you think I have to spend explaining what we do?
That's it.
It's pretty straightforward. If we were, Brown Kitces Recruiting, then we're well, okay, what do you recruit? What do you do? If we just call it Brown and Kitces, so we were Merrill and Lynch. Someday down the road, could we build a thing that says when you see Brown Kitces, that embodies all things that is hiring awesome young financial planners to come and be successful in your firm. We could build that brand to do it, but I'll admit there's an elegant simplicity of just calling it what you do, or I even actually prefer what you do, not just and who you serve. It's New Planner Recruiting, Financial Advisor Bean Counters. What do you think they do? They're bookkeeping for financial advisors. XY Planning Network. So I admit, I'm actually someone that I like naming a lot of my businesses that I'm related into. Can we just name it for what it does so that anybody who sees the name kind of gets it immediately? But I guess if there's one thing that you take away from this conversation, the fact that you happen to use your name or build around your name, it's definitely not fatal. It's not fatal to building a successful business in the long run. You can brand around your name the same way that you brand around any kind of name or label organization, because ultimately it's really around the culture that your business lives and how you serve the people you serve. It's not what you name it. How you live it and the culture you build around it will become the thing that embodies and symbolizes the brand. And that's ultimately what matters for the business in the long run. But if you want to, name something that's just really straightforward to connect with the people that you want to connect with, I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just don't get too wrapped up in thinking that that's the crucial thing that's going to make or break your business.
Alan 1, Kitces 0. You notice he came over to my side of the argument.
You're only saying that because I founded a business with you that's not called more Kitces.
Oh, I love it. No, I agree that ultimately in the long run, it's probably not going to matter, but I think it's an opportunity. And, we ultimately fall back on just naming it after ourselves. But
well, so I have to admit is one wrap up thing, and then we'll wind down this part. So I believe in the VI community, we have the ability to actually do votes.
We could do a poll.
Can we do some kind of poll around this?
Yes. On whether or not I won this argument or whether or not you should name the firm. Or both.
I guess both. Yeah. I know it's going to happen. I threw myself under the bus on this vote at the end when I said it's okay, still name it XYPN Network or whatever you do. But yeah. Let's put out a poll of just I don't know. How do you feel about this? I mean, as you're going out there, are you planning on naming the firm after yourself? Or are you planning on naming the firm something separate? And again, I think there's a part of it as well. Just to kind of circle back and see at their end, are you trying to build a business that's beyond you? Most advisors at the end of the day, I guess I'll speak anecdotally because I don't have an official industry survey for this, but I talk to a zillion advisors. I think most of us build businesses that, frankly, at the end of the day, are just meant to be businesses built around us that make us financially successful, that allow us to achieve the things that we want to achieve in life. We're not trying to build this bigger, broader entity that's going to survive for generations beyond ourselves. And it really, really is fine to make the business around you and name the business around you because it's literally around you. People are buying you. So
that gets back into setting those goals early on.
What are you trying to build? And I don't think what you name it ultimately is the defining factor of what you're trying to build. I can name a business after myself, but build it to go beyond me. And frankly, I can build a business that isn't named after myself and completely fail to build it in a way that it's ever going to last beyond me. But it is an interesting symbolic marker, I think, of a founder's mentality around.
I think that's more business. What it is. And that's kind of what I was talking earlier. Is it causation or correlation that I think it's an indicator,
but I think there is an indicator. There is a messaging there. I think
Agreed.
That's very true.
All right. So I think we have time for one more question since you and I can never shut up and just kind of keep rambling. So that's totally fine. We do these once a month. So if we didn't get your question answered this time, we will get to it next time. And if you have a question that you want us to answer, you can shoot it to us at radio@xyplanningNetwork.com or join our VIP community at xyplanningNetwork.com/VIP. So this question is in regards to monthly fees. So with a retainer fee structure, what are measurable ways for charging higher fees to more complex clients? For instance, my fee range is $100 to $500 a month. How do I justify that they are Mr. or Miss $500 a month? So I get this question a lot from advisors that are, because I handle many of the calls for folks that are thinking about joining XY Planning Network. And going forward, actually, if you call, you will talk to another one of our team members, most likely, thankfully, because we do a lot of these calls, which is fun. But this is a really common question of, so I'm going to have a range. How do I calculate it? And I'm going to start by saying if your range is $100 a month to $500 a month, I want you to go back and listen to, let me pull it up, episode 11 with Kitces and myself, where we talk about defining your ideal client in your niche market. Because if you're charging $100 a month to $500 a month, then I don't think you've truly defined who your target market is. Because
that's a really wide range.
You're trying to be all things to all people with a range like this. You're basically saying if the new grad comes in or recently married, fine, I'll put them at the $100 a month. But when the $5 million client comes in with really complex estate needs, I'm going to put them at the $500 a month. And I would contend that you need to pick one. I think you need to be in that $100 to $200 range, or if you want to be the $400 to $500 range, totally fine. But I think you need to pick that and not even make this type of range available. Now that I'm just going to caveat there by saying, like, who's your ideal client? Let's start there. And then we can move into this discussion of, okay, so how do we determine complexity? And then how do we showcase that to a client? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was curious where you were going to go with this when you had the question started answering, because I have to admit my gut response hearing the question was the exact same thing. Like, wow, you were charging people anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000, particularly for our network where we're typically working with some younger folks in general, like you're serving Gen X and Gen Y clients. So particularly at that level, like that's a really wide range. That's a range that's so wide that I was starting to feel the same thing. Like, so who exactly are you trying to serve with this? Like, if you've got a price point in there that's $500 a month, you've got some vision of a certain level of client income, wealth, sophistication, complexity, niche needs, something that justifies $500 a month. And if that's really who you want to work with, yeah, like just what exactly is the function of your $100 a month tier in the first place? Now, I don't think it's necessarily fatal to have this kind of price range, but here's where it starts queuing up for me. When I hear I'm charging $100 to $500 a month based on complexity, what I hear is I want to serve anyone no matter who they are, and I'll just tier the pricing up and down based on the complexity, which I think means you're not targeted enough in who you're trying to work with, and I think that's going to create challenges for you. Now, if you've got a clear focus, like I want to work with entrepreneurs, and I'm going to work with highly successful entrepreneurs that are making good money. They're pulling in good dollars. So like they'll be fine at $500 a month. So I might define a service tier of what I'm going to do for them at $500 a month. Maybe we'll do quarterly check-ins. I'll maintain a continuous balance sheet that you can check in on. I'll work with you through cash flow and budgeting. I'm going to sit in on meetings when you are sitting down with the lawyers and the accountants to figure out your next business structure and how you're going to do it to make sure that it fits right within the whole picture. I will coordinate on your asset protection discussions and make sure that you're doing things right on that end. It's like you start tiering up what the comprehensive $500 a month offering looks like for an entrepreneur who can afford that price point. Now, once you're there, could you then come back and say, I have a $100 a month option as well? Yes, but what I would do here, it wouldn't tier off complexity because I've got a niche. My niche is entrepreneurs who need a certain demand, who are willing to buy my highest tier service that fits them because it's a niche built for them. Now, could I back off and say, is there a $100 a month service level for this client? Is there a $100 a month version of my service that I would offer this person? Sure, I'm going to tier a couple things back. I will not sit in on your attorney and accountant meetings because that's very time intensive. You're not paying me enough for that. I will do an annual projection update on your financial planning scenarios. I will give you structured check-in calls once every quarter to talk about a couple of items. You will still be on my mailing list, and you can still sit in on my quarterly entrepreneur webinars where I bring together a bunch of entrepreneurs and bring in a guest speaker to talk to them. So you can have service levels at multiple tiers for a particular target clientele. I think that's a very reasonable way to tier pricing. But again, going right back to Alan's first comment, when I hear I want to go from $100 to $500 by solely on complexity, then what I'm hearing basically is you just want a pricing model where you can work with anybody off the street. The more money they have, the more you're going to charge them. And now you're just trying to come up with a reason to justify why you're charging rich people more. And yeah, I guess I want to charge rich people more too because they have more wherewithal to pay and all that. But I don't think you're really building a very targeted business when you do that.
It's one of the challenges.
Because you're tiering complexity instead of tiering service levels for a target client, which may have a complexity component. But I'm hearing business not targeted. I'm trying to serve everyone.
I think one of the challenges in financial planning is that we've really all gone comprehensive. Not very many. We haven't really figured out how to trim down comprehensive financial planning to like sort of comprehensive and do kind of these different service tiers, which is an interesting discussion in and of itself. But I would say that there are a couple ways that you could handle this. So I think what you're hearing Michael and I both say is like, don't have a range, have a really set service models. So Brittany Castro in her episode talked about that she has 3 service tiers: individuals, couples, business owners. And I'm trying to remember the numbers, 2,500, 3,500, 5,000 or something like that. So instead of saying you're more complex, it's just you're a business owner, so I charge you $5,000. You're an individual, so I charge you $2,500. And to get really set, because she has very set services for what she's offering. But if you're in a position where you just say, look, my target market has a extremely wide range of assets and ability to pay. So for instance, let's say you work with, newer doctors, newly minted physicians. You're going to be coming across folks that have really high income and, net worth in the negative $500,000 to $1 million range. And, over, a few years, you're going to get them up and that income's going to grow. So one way that I did this, and I will not say that I was overly successful with it, but there are firms that have proven that this model works, was actually charging on a monthly basis, but it was a net worth and income based calculation. So instead of just basing it on assets, it was 0.5% of net worth plus 1% of AGI. And then those two combined was the fee. So let's say you have a doctor making $300,000 with $500,000 negative net worth. Well, 0.5% of negative $500,000 just goes away. And then it's 1% AGI. So basically $3,000 a year. And over time, and then divide that out monthly. And then every few years kind of reset the fee. And over time, that fee goes up as their means go up. So it's in many ways similar to an AUM fee, that it is going up with assets, but I think it actually has more of a complexity component, probably the best one that I've seen, because nothing to me screams, complexity more than net worth and income. And there are a few firms that have done this. It's at least a proxy. Yeah. Yeah. It's at least it's a stake in the ground. And there are a few firms that have done this, and we will have them on the show at some point to talk about it. One is that it really came from the Planning Center out of Moline, Illinois, run there by Marty Kurtz and Eric Keys and Andrew Silverson, their whole team. Great firm there. And they have done this successfully. And I think because they do tax returns, that was, I think, the issue that I had, because I would do tax returns, but it's ski season. So ski season wins out over doing taxes for 3 months. But so it's an option.
So a few things on this really fast. So when you started going down the doctor end, I thought you were going to go to a different direction. Because I think even doctors are interested in it. So, okay, I just want to work with doctors, and I'm going to charge you $100 to $500 a month based on complexity, right? Because if you're a 30-year-old doctor that's just a year or two out of residency, you have negative net worth but high income, so you've got 170s. And then if you're a 30-year practitioner doctor in your 60s getting ready for retirement, and you've got all this wealth and other stuff, then you're my $500 a month client. And you could try to tier it that way, but when I hear that, all I'm thinking is, your focus is too broad, because you're working with every doctor from the 30-year-old to the 60-year-old, from the negative $500,000 to the positive $5 million net worth. That, you're right back to the same problem. You're actually still too broad. If you just want to work with the young residents that are straight out of school and have high income and negative assets and need all this help, focus on them, work with them, make a service model that's appropriately priced for them, and become the country's leading expert in medical residents who are starting their career on the right foot. And that can be enough. That can be enough to have an amazing business. We met however many thousands and tens of thousands of doctors every year, and you only need 100 clients, most of us, to have a great practice.
I'll tell you what listeners are thinking, because I get this question pretty often too, and that is, yes, Michael, I can be the expert on that. I'm going to have 100 newly minted physicians that I help, but over the years, they're going to become those $5 million clients, because I'm certainly not going to turn them loose when they hit $1 million.
And understood. Your business gets to evolve. How many firms do you know today that have $1 million minimum as an RIA? How many of them launched the firm 20 years ago with the $1 million minimum? None. Not one. They launched with $50,000 minimums, $100,000 minimums. I know one guy that launched a $10K minimum because just his custodian would let him open smaller accounts. And then as their clients grew and evolved and their practice evolved, sure, their service model evolved as well. And that's totally okay. If you want to start a practice that does, $200 a month retainer fees for young residents, and 30 years from now, you're going to have a practice that serves affluent physicians getting ready to retire who all have a minimum net worth of $2 million, because it's actually the same people, and you just move with them for 30 years, fine, that's absolutely fine. That's completely okay. You're setting a target clientele you're going to work with at this point, and you're going to serve them well. But when you're working with human beings who age and have evolving circumstances, it's totally okay that your business is going to evolve over time. It does evolve. Your clients evolve, you evolve, service models evolve, just the nature of what we do in our industry evolves. I mean, if you started your practice as an RA 30 years ago, you were also basically in the business selling mutual funds. Because that's what we did. There were no ETFs. There was no software to asset allocation. There were no models. There was no rebalancing tools. Like, you did different things for different clients who had different needs with different net worth, and you got paid a different amount for it. And the business evolves over time. And it's not because you're like bait and switching and saying like, oh crap, I'm going to do this and that's going to change every couple of years. Like, it's not like you're throwing the game plan out every couple of years, but you will evolve and your clients will evolve. And if you're a good business owner, your business should evolve as your clients grow and develop and their needs change. And you've got people that already love what you do. You offer more things to them and you adapt to their changing needs. Like, even with XYPN Network here, we do this. Like, we launched the business a year and a half ago with a certain service set offering. Then we went and listened to members and what they said they wanted. And what we heard was that a real pain point was, hey, we need support on compliance services. And 9 months later, we launched a compliance solution. So now we'll do your compliance work when you start your firm. We didn't launch it that way. We didn't know it was going to be that big of a deal to people. We evolved the business as it went by listening to who we serve. And like, now we're a platform where offering compliance is a popular service. It wasn't even something we included when we started. And that's just the point that, like, your business evolves over time by listening to the people you serve and what they need. That's okay. But we still have the same target clientele. We're trying to work with younger advisors that want to work with their peers.
Yeah, it's a point well taken for those that are
slash rate.
Well, we like to say, instead of younger advisors, we like to say young at heart advisors. We do not discriminate on the basis of age. It's a really good point for those advisors that are looking at starting their own firm, is that, we get very stuck in, the way that we do business today is the way that we're going to do business forever. And so let's design the firm of the future based on the firm today. But, to your point, people were starting firms just selling insurance and mutual funds, and things just sort of started to evolve. And I'm excited to see where the planning profession evolves from here. Because I think that we do amazing work. I think we are horribly inefficient and can't take care of enough clients. And so, where's that efficiency going to come from? Where do the changes come in terms of technology? How different does life become when we have holographic images of each other that we can communicate with, or virtual reality, or teleportation? I don't know. Who knows where we're going to go? But if I told you 30 years ago we were going to be able to call each other on video and have a conversation and record this for everyone to listen to on a little device in their pocket called a smartphone, people would have said we were crazy. So, there's just no way to predict the future. So you just have to be flexible and willing to pivot.
I'm not even sure I'd call it pivot. Like, pivot to me is more dramatic.
That's fair.
To me, niches evolve. Like, pivot is what you do when you're going like, oh shit, this direction isn't working. We got to pivot to another direction. Like, to me, niches evolve. Like, to me, evolve is a powerful term in this context. Like, you find, you strengthen your strengths, you let go of your weaknesses, you keep moving in the direction that's just serving people better. And it's that evolutionary process about how most businesses really get better over time. Like, no one just sets the magic stake in the ground on day one is like, I've just got this vision of this thing that I'm going to do. And for the next 30 years, we're just going to do that and nothing different. And it works perfectly exactly as you visioned it originally. Like, that doesn't happen in the real world.
No, you make a really good point there too. And that is, I think we all have worked in those firms that put their stake in the ground and never evolved. And we see them, stuck 20, 30 years ago. And that, in the way things used to be
and
done.
They were
and
visionary at the time.
They were
visionary at the time, but, times change.
No, it's very true. And we see this in terms of technology. I always love telling advisors, if you're not moving a major piece of technology every year or two, you're probably falling behind. In this like look of horror, you can just see it's like, what do you mean I have to move? Like, if you're not moving your performance reporter, CRM, rebalancing software, if you're not moving something every couple of years, you're behind, because ultimately new stuff comes on the market, old stuff fails. We have evolved. And so, and we just see this throughout planning firms is a refusal to evolve. So I think if you're open to that evolution process, and making slow incremental improvements and changes instead of, getting to a point where you do have to do a complete overhaul of every system, every process, everything to do with your marketing, and basically create a new firm, with some existing revenue, then you're going to be a world ahead. All right, Michael, this has been fun. As usual, we can talk for an hour plus about anything. So this time we got through 5 questions, and we have a couple that we did not get to that we will push to next month. But
all right.
Thanks
we'll have more things to talk about on the next mailbag.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming back on. And thanks everybody for listening. Again, you can shoot us an email at radio@xyplanningnetwork.com with any questions that you have, as well as join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Thanks so much, Michael.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. This one was fun. I love these mailbag episodes. They're just a really good time. One, they're just fun for Michael and I to get to rant a little bit or go a little unhinged, argue a little bit, but also just to be able to hear what you're dealing with. So, we probably never would have addressed some of these questions had they not come in from listeners. So thank you for everybody that sent in a question, and we will definitely get to some of the ones that we were not able to get to next month. So thank you again for joining us. This month's shows are brought to you by Betterment Institutional, a leading technology platform helping advisors scale their practice, improve their client experience, and save time. Betterment teamed up with industry veterans to build a next-generation interface for clients, automating workflows to allow advisors to spend more time with their clients. You can meet their practice management team dedicated to working with you to integrate a digital strategy into your business, providing best practices on technology adoption and integration. Check them out at bettermentinstitutional.com, and also be sure to listen to episode 16 at xyplanningnetwork.com/16 to hear an in-depth interview with Betterment Institutional partner Steve Lokshin. All right, everybody, we will see you next time. Thanks so much.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.